It's been described as potentially the worst energy shock ever.
Well, I think you can drop the potentially. It is, unquestionably. And the only thing that means it isn't worse is because it hasn't gone on that long. We're only a month in. There could be months more of this.
When there is disruption in the supply chain, when there are cost increases, we know that eventually that gets passed through to the consumer. They're the ones that pick up the bill at the end of the day.
Let's say we get to a reality whereby the Americans sign a deal with the Iranians that effectively turns the Strait of Hormuz into a toll booth. Is that a possible reality that you can foresee?
It's a possible one, yeah, but it's a crazy outcome. I mean, you don't generally fight a war with the intention of giving your adversary control of a strategic waterway and paying them billions of dollars a year.
Hello and welcome to the Fourcast. Oil. It's all about oil and energy. Donald Trump has told the UK to go and take oil from the Strait of Hormuz, although he didn't tell us how to do it, as reports circulate that the UK is to receive the last tanker of jet fuel from the Middle East this week as the blockade or the virtual blockade of that strait continues. What are the real risks to our economy, our energy security, consumers? What on earth is going on? Does the government have a plan to deal with it all? We're going to speak to Robin Mills. He's the CEO of Qamar Energy, and to Holly Mead, who's a money journalist. Welcome to you both. Let me start with you, Robin. It's been described as potentially the worst oil shock ever, or energy shock, I should say. Is that true? Can you put it into some kind of context?
Well, I think you can drop the potentially. It is, unquestionably. And the only thing that means it isn't worse is because it hasn't gone on that long. We're only a month in. There could be months more of this. Hopefully not, but I think that's the way things are looking. So if we look back at the previous great oil shocks, if we look back at the 1973 embargo or Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait, things like this, we lost maybe between 3 to 5 million barrels per day. And in this current crisis, even allowing for all of the offsets and bypasses, we've lost 12 to 13 million. So it's at least twice, possibly 3 times as bad. And that's just oil, not to mention gas and a bunch of other commodities.
Just briefly on the oil price, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the 73 oil shock, the price of oil, tripled or quadrupled. That's not the case here, is it? I mean, it's gone up a lot, but it's not gone up that much. So why is it so much worse in terms of, the financial repercussions of this?
Well, we're talking about the quantity of energy, or the quantity of oil and other things lost, and what percentage that is of use. That makes this such a big shock. Yeah, the price shock so far in percentage terms is big, but crude oil prices has not quite doubled. We came into this shock with prices already rising as people anticipated some kind of military action. But I think prices potentially will rise significantly further, unfortunately. If the strait remains closed, if this quantity of oil is not getting out, then as refiners and other users empty their tanks, need to refill, then the price will go higher and higher. And we're looking at a financial market price here when we talk about the oil price. But if you look at what people are willing to pay for a cargo of physical oil, real oil in a tanker today, delivered today when they need it desperately, that is already $130 plus.
Wow. That's quite a difference, isn't it? I mean, and I guess the other problem is that you've got production facilities shutting down in the Middle East, in the Gulf, because they've got nowhere to store the stuff if it can't be put on tankers and then sent into the export market. So there's one problem there. When it comes to gas, for instance, I talked to the Qataris last week. They're desperate because the biggest gas field in the world was blown up by an Iranian drone, and it would take them years to fix that. So there's real damage here, physical damage, and physical problems to the infrastructure that didn't exist in the 73 shock.
Yeah, that's right. And look, so far, this crisis, it's mostly about the oil and the gas being stuck in the Gulf, not able to get out. The physical damage, fortunately, so far, not so much, with the exception, as you say, of the Qatari gas facilities. And even there, it wasn't their whole plant that was blown up. It's probably cut their output by about 17%. Once they're up and running again, most of it will be up and running within 3 to 4 months. It's just that 17% that will take years to repair. But yeah, you're right. Of course, in 73, there wasn't physical damage. But in 1990, of course, the Iraqi invasion of Kuwait, there was huge physical damage to the Kuwait oil fields. It took years to fix.
Holly, watching this either as a journalist or as a consumer or as someone who just goes to the local petrol station to fill up the car, you're kind of seeing the real world effects of this day by day as the price of petrol goes up. presumably the price of lots of other things will go up as well.
The outbreak of the Ukraine-Russia war only in 2022 is so fresh in people's minds, and what that brought with it was that 40-year high inflation of above 11%, and we saw everything go up, and particularly back then, the price of groceries at the supermarket. So I think that is fresh in people's minds, and it's worrying. We don't like uncertainty. A lot of people are already feeling the squeeze, and we want to be able to budget and plan for the future. And likely for any road commuter, probably every day at the moment on the petrol forecourt that they pass, they're noticing the pennies are creeping up.
Quite substantially, actually. I mean, increase of what, 10%, 12%? And that makes quite a difference.
Yeah, we're at an average today of about 150p for a litre of petrol and getting on for 180p for diesel. For any drive commuter, that is a huge cost hike. And for anyone who commutes, to work, if they're factoring that into their profits, it all starts to chip away a bit. And then you read headlines that are quite panic-inducing about we're not getting any more oil in and forecourts will run dry. And that all starts to become self-fulfilling, and we see the queues, and that's worrying. So I think it's just trying to not panic, trying not to do the stockpile thing and the turn up with the jerry can thing.
Because, all over the world, you're seeing countries enact special measures. So, in Thailand, the newsreaders took off their jackets on air during a news bulletin because the air conditioning had been turned off, and they wanted to send a signal to the rest of the country. But, the 4-day week or the 3-day week, across the world, people are doing lots of different things. It feels a little bit like the reaction to COVID in that, lots of countries are taking different measures to deal with this crisis, and they're not all coordinated. Is that the way you see it, Holly?
I think for most households, the best thing to do is try not to get swept down the rabbit hole of those bigger macro and geopolitical concerns, and focus on, what are the few things you can control? How can you reduce your energy usage at home? How can I perhaps use my car less? How can I make other cost savings, like switching my insurer or my phone provider, and try and free up a bit more in the household budget that way? But it's also hard because it's harder to budget when prices are rising. Yeah. We know that minimum wage is going up tomorrow, so that's a small help. And any pensioners who receive the state pension, that's going up tomorrow, so hopefully that will help. And actually, we've heard today that from July, our energy bills will be rising, but from tomorrow, for 3 months, they will be falling. So it's not all doom and gloom, and you just focus on those micro wins.
Okay, the micro wins. I love that. Let's go back to macro storms then, Robin. Explain to me in very clear terms why, even if the war were to stop next week, there's an accumulator effect of what's been going on that will lead to higher prices and fuel shortages. Explain how that works.
Well, firstly, the Gulf countries have had to shut down a lot of their production because they can't export, and those barrels are just not being produced, right? So there's a deficit in the market. Let's say it's 11 million barrels per day, 330 odd million barrels per month. And we've had about 1 month of crisis so far. Every month is accumulating that loss of 330 million barrels. Now, when the crisis ends, hopefully sooner rather than later, everybody will have to rebuild their stocks. So refiners will want to fill up again. The governments that have released their strategic stocks will want to fill those at least over time. So there'll be for a period, there'll be kind of higher demand for oil to go back into storage. So that'll keep prices higher. Then there'll be the disruption, and this is again kind of the COVID experience, right? When you have a huge shock like this to the world economy and then it ends, there's a process of adjustment to which all the oil tankers that are in the wrong place get back to the right place and fill up. All the tanks that were empty get refilled. So there's a whole logistical problem of reshuffling that'll take time. Plants that were closed down restart. Some industrial facilities could take like a year to restart, So
wow.
And then there's the ongoing geopolitical worries. I don't think this war is going to end cleanly with some treaty and everyone goes away happy. I think we'll be left with a legacy in the Gulf of worry, insecurity, knowing this could happen again. And that will also mean people will want prices to be higher. They'll want to keep more oil in stock if it's available in case of a repeat.
Let's say we get to a reality whereby the Americans sign a deal with the Iranians that effectively turns the Strait of Hormuz into a toll booth, and they can charge a certain amount of money for each tanker, depending on whether they come from a nice country or a nasty country, as far as they see it. Is it possible to get to some kind of modus vivendi with that going forward? Is that just then priced into the market, and people will just have to deal with it, even though it's unpleasant? Is that a possible reality that you can foresee?
It's a possible one, yeah, but it's a crazy outcome. I mean, you don't generally fight a war.
Of course.
Fight a war with the intention of giving your adversary control of a strategic waterway and paying them billions of dollars a year.
But it is a possibility. I mean, if Trump walks away from it, effectively, that's what we're going to get, unless the Gulf states get involved and Israel again together.
It absolutely is. And look, if the US can't do it, I don't think any other combination of countries is likely to be able to reopen the strait by force either. So, yeah, that is a possible outcome. Now, to be honest, I don't think that makes much. If that were the outcome, I don't think that makes much difference to the energy consumer. Imagine you're paying $2 million, which is the number we hear, to get your tanker through. Typical big tanker carries 2 million barrels, $1 a barrel on an oil price that's $100 per barrel. So, the cost increase to the consumer is not much then.
Yeah.
But the strategic implications for the Gulf countries of allowing Iran to establish itself as the kind of de facto owner of the strait, as if it's some kind of Iranian Suez Canal. I mean, that is remarkable, and which country would want to be in that position?
Holly, are you seeing evidence of people asking questions about electric cars, which are, of course, quite expensive? I mean, certainly the European variety is more expensive than the Chinese variety. Are people really seriously thinking of switching now because petrol become so expensive, plus all the other things that made people turn to electric cars in the past?
For the first time, electric vehicles are liable for road tax. And that was previously a huge incentive for a lot of people. So I think electric vehicles being brought within the scope of that is problematic and a disincentive. A lot of the levies and grants that have disappeared have also kind of stopped that. And we have this thing called the expensive car tax, which is literally, the name tells you exactly that. Whereas if you buy a car above a certain value, it was £40,000. It's been put up in the budget. You pay an extra £400 a year, I believe it is, for the first 5 years of ownership. And most EVs, even the cheap ones, I'm putting that in inverted commas, are coming in above that. So there are still extra costs. Now, if you can have a charger at home, then charging that vehicle does become quickly cost effective. But for anyone who doesn't have the ability to do that, who's relying on the network's infrastructure or on street charging, it's still cost prohibitive, and there's still a lot of question marks over the reliability and availability of what is there. So I don't think this is going to encourage masses of people to suddenly go out and buy EVs. But I think it does keep the conversation moving that way for the future. And perhaps next time people are replacing cars, that becomes a more viable alternative.
Are you seeing signs that the government is approaching this crisis cleverly in terms of taxation, either reducing taxes here, maybe increasing some other taxes there, in order to recalibrate everything towards a new normal that involves higher energy prices, especially from oil?
We've kind of heard whisperings about already that possibly could come to fruition is whether the government will have to intervene over energy prices, which they did in the previous energy crisis. So we know that previously the government stepped in and put a cap of £2,500 a year on the average annual household bill. And without that, it would have gone to above £4,000, which obviously would have been awful for millions of households. I think there's a lot of conversation as well about how do we become less energy dependent? So what can we do to boost our energy production on these shores so that we are more shielded in the event of conflicts such as this?
Robin, just talking about that, I mean, I remember from the Ukraine war, an insufficient amount of gas that we have storage capacity for in this country, and that was one of the big problems. Is that still the case, or have the government done something about it?
No, there's still only a few days of gas storage in the UK, but that's because the UK obviously produces its own gas to some extent. It imports from Norway next door, always been a very reliable supplier. And it imports liquefied natural gas.
So we don't need that storage.
It hasn't been necessary. It was a different case in Germany and so on, where they were getting gas from Russia and they needed to store gas for summer and use it in the winter and so on. Different case for the UK. So that's less a worry for me. Again, gas in this case is more about price. And and prices will go up, not to the level they did in 2022, I think, but they still will go up.
So your big worry is still oil?
Yeah, gas is also a worry, but less so than oil. Yes, oil is the big problem here.
And what should the government be doing to prepare us? Because, I mean, the message they're putting out is very much, keep calm and carry on. And, they say keep calm and carry on. And then you watch the news, like Channel 4 News, and you feel less calm and you're not quite sure how to carry on. So what should they be doing that they're not doing?
Yeah, look, I have some sympathy for them because it's for any government in this position, it's tough. You only have a limited number of levers to pull, and some of them aren't connected to anything or don't do much. Look, I think avoiding panic is important. When you see petrol stations run short, it's not because there's a shortage of fuel. It's because everybody's run down there and, as Holly says, filled up the jerry cans. So avoiding that is part of it. I think doing things like cutting taxes on fuel is pointless. I mean, that's just giving money to people who drive further, and instead of telling people to save. Yes, there are the poor in society who need some support on their bills. There are ways to do that rather than just effectively handing out money to everybody. But doing everything that can be done, to safeguard vital services, make sure ambulances and police and everybody get fuel, and then to see what is there that can be done in terms of efficiency, use fuel more effectively. Again, as Holly says, more public transport, more car sharing, work from home, all these kind of things. And then in the longer term, to encourage the use of electric vehicles as much as possible.
Trump, of course, has said in a post over that we should get our own oil from the Middle East, I think he meant, or via the Strait. I mean, do you know what he meant by it, and what can we do about it? I mean, can we get our own oil from there?
Well, if any tanker's willing to sail in and pick up and come out again, then yes. But that's the problem, isn't it? No, look, I think this is about firstly trying to shift blame, and secondly trying to call NATO in to help bail out the US from this situation, which I'm sure it's not going to do. Look, I think there's a role for NATO, maybe the UK, France, in a post-war scenario of escorting and peacekeeping, but not in an active combat zone like this one.
And of course, America is oil independent, energy independent, and is the biggest energy exporter in the world, isn't it?
Well, biggest, gross exporter of oil, yeah, but being an exporter doesn't make you energy independent.
They keep saying they're energy independent. Are they fibbing?
They love to say this, but independence isn't only about exporting more than you import. So the US needs to import some grades of crude oil and export others. It needs to import some refined products and export others, and it's tied into the world market. Americans pay the same wholesale price as everybody else. They could cut themselves off, and then Trump quite possibly might do that, but that will have a whole bunch of other disastrous consequences. Well, it would be shoot the American oil industry in the foot. They wouldn't be able to expand, and that's kind of one of the key offsets to the loss of supply here. The industry would be furious. It would make the industry very inefficient because it wouldn't be able to import things that's in a deficit and wouldn't be able to export when it has a surplus. So it would end up making the crisis worse, and it would, of course, export the crisis to others. Other people then run short of fuel. And, the US, whatever it might think, is actually tied into the world economy and does depend on the economic health of other countries.
Just getting back to the introduction, I mean, I said that the last tanker of jet fuel from the Middle East heading to the UK would be arriving this week. Is it the last tanker? And does that mean that we don't get jet fuel, for the foreseeable future, and our holiday plans post-Easter might be up the spout? Yeah,
it's probably true the last tanker would be arriving around now, but that's the last tanker from the Gulf. It's not the last tanker in the world. Look, and for the other tankers, yes, there's going to be a shortage of fuel globally. That'll mean there'll have to be less flying. Doesn't mean that anybody runs out. It means that prices will go up and airlines will have to fly less, and people can't afford a flight or think they have better things to spend their money on. They'll have to go without. Somehow we have to save 10% of global oil supply overnight in air travel and driving and industries and everything else that uses oil.
Holly, just as Easter's upon us and people are looking forward to the summer, maybe getting out of the kind of eternal grey of an English winter, want to book their holidays, is there any evidence that the airlines are either shutting down or rerouting or charging more for flights that we all thought we might be able to take?
We haven't seen that yet. That doesn't mean it won't happen. And if you've paid for your summer holiday, then they shouldn't really be putting prices up after the point of payment.
If you're that organized, Holly, I don't know. I'm not that organized.
Some people sort this stuff very far in advance. We know air passenger duty is going up in April with the new financial year in April anyway, and it's already very depressing when you buy a cheap flight and at the end you get the breakdown and you realise your flight cost £1 and then you paid 500 quid in taxes. So expect that column to get a bit worse.
So I think across the, whether it's food prices, obviously prices at the pump, airline tickets, hotels, it's all affected, isn't it, by this?
Yes, but it's been the case for several years. We have been living through a cost of living crisis where we have had several years of sustained high inflation. And when there is disruption in the supply chain, when there are cost increases across the board, we know that eventually that gets passed through to the consumer because they're the ones that pick up the bill at the end of the day. And it's hard. It's really hard.
Interest rates are not coming down. In fact, there was a report last week. There might be 3 hikes in interest rates this year from the Bank of England. That's what the markets, some more gloomy aspects of the markets are pricing in. I know last week, 500 mortgage products were already thrown out by lenders. Again, if you're trying to get into the housing market and get a mortgage, this is really bad news.
And it's actually really hard for anyone who's already on the housing ladder and was perhaps preparing to remortgage this year and might have been budgeting for a certain rate because of the predictions that rates were coming down, and they've now got to go and redo those sums. It's a really hard time for households. I think, again, it's not getting too bogged down in that macro stuff. And just making use of all the tools at your disposal. So, if you are looking for a mortgage, get a fee-free mortgage broker and find the absolute best deal that you can. If you are switching energy deal, make sure you're locking in now. If you're worried that prices are going to go up further, see if you can lock in on a 2 or 3 year deal to get that price assured so you're in control of what's going out of the household each month.
So the next few weeks are crucial, aren't they? What are the key indicators that you're looking for to gauge how bad this thing will get beyond the obvious one of timing, when it'll end?
We need to see, is the US going to come out with a realistic strategy, a military and or diplomatic strategy to reopen the strait and come to some agreement? This war is going to end with an agreement, as wars do. And is there a plan to get to that? What does that look like? Or is the US going to walk away, as Donald Trump has suggested, and leave everything in a mess, which is a pretty bad outcome, but perhaps not the absolute worst outcome, perhaps something we could kind of muddle through. But I'll be looking very much, of course, at where oil prices go, and I'm particularly watching the physical oil prices. What are people paying for real oil today, not what's in the financial market for oil that's coming down the line in June or whatever.
But presumably, if the US Marines, which are on their way in thousands to the Gulf, if some of them try and take Kharg Island, this oil terminal that's all important for Iranian oil exports, or if they're trying to just fight their way through the Strait of Hormuz, this means that this hot war will come straight into that all-important waterway. Even the few tankers that are getting through right now will not be able to get through. Then it's going to make things much worse, isn't it, in the short term? Absolutely.
Yeah, and I don't find this idea of trying to capture Kharg Island at all realistic or it would achieve anything if they do. And so, yes, it would cut off the Iranian oil exports. And the US has been very careful to let the Iranian oil exports continue and even to lift sanctions on Iran because they don't want to take another 2 million barrels per day off the market. But if they attack Kharg Island, that 2 million disappears. And then the Iranians, I'm sure, will then retaliate against other energy facilities in the region and will be left with a lot more permanent damage. So, yeah, that's kind of going more into the direction of worst case scenarios.
Talking of worst case scenarios, if the Houthis decide to continue to attack Israel and maybe resume what they did during the Gaza war, which is to try and close the Bab el-Mandab Straits, which is the way that some Saudi oil is now getting out because they've got this pipeline that goes across the north of the country. That would be even worse, wouldn't it? Double stranglehold on the two straits.
Yeah, even worse, indeed. What it means then, I think the Saudi oil would have to head north. It would go around through the Suez Canal and it would sail around Africa to get to Asia. That adds, 3 to 4 weeks sailing time. So it doesn't totally block the oil. It does mean a lot of oil is then locked up on tankers not doing anything. So it certainly makes things worse. What would be really bad, though, would be if the Houthis were to actually attack the loading port of Yanbu, which is where this this Saudi oil is now coming out. If they could put that port out of action, or even at least disrupt it, then of course there's even less oil than coming out of the Gulf than there is today.
Final question to you, Holly. I mean, the government has said, don't panic. We're all saying keep calm and carry on. At the same time, we see all these numbers ticking up in the wrong direction, so far at least. Do you think the government should be more honest about the worst case scenarios and prepare us for, the stuff that we may have to get used to in a public service campaign, public information campaign, the way they did with COVID, but arguably a little bit late in the day?
I'm not sure we're at that stage yet. As Robin said, the key thing with this conflict is how bad it is directly related to how long it goes on for. And we're a month in at the moment. So I think perhaps we're not at that stage yet. And it's very easy to get bogged down in the data, and there's a lot of worry about GDP numbers and inflation numbers and what they're all going to get to. I think it's really important to keep in mind that all of these measures are backwards looking numbers. They only tell us what has happened in the last 12 months. They do not tell us what is going to happen going forwards. I think for most households, probably the Bank of England's base rate of interest is the one to pay attention to, because that influences a lot of things to do with their household finances. So I think it's keeping an eye on the household finances and the household budget, and making as many savings, cutbacks where you can, and considering what can you personally do for your own situation.
Holly Mead and Robin Mills, thanks very much to both of you for coming on to the Forecast. It's all about energy, not just oil, but all of it. And let's see how it goes in the next few weeks. Thanks for watching.